Let's return to the UK. The government is banning the use of taxis to transfer asylum seekers to medical appointments in most circumstances. It comes after an investigation by the BBC found some migrants were travelling long distances in taxis, costing hundreds of pounds per journey. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley has more.
They've got hospital appointments like that, they normally get taxis booked for them. We had one, we actually showed her how to get to the GP surgery. And then she kept insisting, taxi, 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 taxi.
That's a security guard talking to Radio 4 earlier this year. The File on 4 investigation found asylum seekers were routinely taken via taxi to medical appointments. Sometimes the journeys were long, sometimes they cost hundreds of pounds. The Home Office launched a review in response to the BBC's story. And now the government has announced a ban. From February, the use of taxis for medical journeys is to be stopped. There will be limited exemptions for disabled people and pregnancy-related needs. Ministers want alternatives like public transport to be used instead. Taxis are also regularly used to transport people between asylum accommodation. A review into that is ongoing, but ministers want to extend the principle that taxis are only used in exceptional circumstances. The cost of asylum transport has also been revealed to be an average of £15.8 million a year. Ministers hope that stopping their routine use will help slash that cost. The Home Secretary's already announced major changes to the asylum system, making it harder for people to stay in the UK permanently. Shabana Mahmood's also pledged to end the use of asylum hotels by the next election. But figures this week revealed more people were in hotels than had been the case earlier this year. Ms Mahmood said she would continue to root out waste and ensure the use of taxis was only authorised in the most exceptional circumstances. Nick Eardley, BBC News, Westminster.
The use of taxis was one of the significant issues highlighted in an investigative feature on the BBC's File on 4. The reporter Sue Mitchell spoke to the Today programme this morning.
We heard how they were used to transport people long distances when they moved between hotels in different parts of the country. And if they had NHS appointments, they might be transported back to where they'd been staying. In one example, a 250-mile round trip for a hospital appointment. The taxi driver said the cost to the Home Office would be around £600 for that trip.
And
following our investigation, the Home Secretary announced an urgent review into the use of taxis by asylum seekers. The conclusion of that isn't published yet, but the Home Office has now revealed that the cost of all transport for asylum seekers is around £15.8 million per year. From February, taxis won't be used for medical appointments unless there's a particular need, like pregnancy or disability, say.
So around £15.8 million per year. That's the level it's been put at. Those taxi costs, as well as journeys that caught people's eye, especially the ones being made with no passengers.
I know, that was so surprising. And I've kept looking into that. So after our File on 4 investigation aired, I was contacted by taxi drivers who'd done lots of journeys to and from migrant hotels. One of those drivers, Steve, was telling me that he'd sometimes travel long distances to transfer asylum seekers between hotels or detention centres, and they wouldn't get in the car, but their journeys were still charged to the Home Office.
I was averaging about 250 to 275 miles a day. More than once I went from Gatwick to Southampton, and I'd be sitting there, and they'd come back and say, "Oh, look, don't worry, they don't want to go." And they basically refused to move. It just logistically wasn't thought out very well, and I think it was left open to abuse.
It seems there was no effective monitoring by the Home Office of the journeys and the costs. There were 3 different companies with 10-year contracts to provide accommodation for asylum seekers across the UK, and they outsourced things like food and transport to other firms. Steve was saying that he thinks this makes it easier for them to inflate the mileage. He says drivers could be sent over long distances, say. They'd take passengers somewhere that was maybe even close to the hotel, and a second driver would then be dispatched to bring them back from that same appointment. He said a round trip he made cost nearly, it was 100 miles, and he thinks it costs, well over £100, and that was just to take an asylum seeker to see a dentist.
And it was only about 1.5 miles from his hotel. And after 20 minutes, I got a phone call from the control centre.
Because you were going to wait. The plan was you were going to wait.
I was going to wait to take him back to the hotel.
Yeah.
And they said to me, no, we need you back at Gatwick. So they sent me from Gatwick to Reading for a 1.5 mile journey, sent me back to Gatwick, and then sent this guy from Heathrow to Reading to pick him up.
And you think that was done to basically maximise the number of drivers making these long journeys?
I definitely do. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous.
It's worth saying Steve's one of several drivers with concerns about journey charging. He thinks about half of his daily mileage was made without a passenger.
I'm just taking that in. What else is the Home Office saying?
It says it's still reviewing the wider use of taxis for non-medical appointments. There's something it's not saying too, which is the cost of transport in the past year. The figure it's given, £15.8 million, is an average over recent years. Whenever I've asked how much it's spent in the last year, the Home Office has declined to answer. And we learned this week that the number of people in migrant hotels has gone up from 32,000 in June to 36,000 in September. So it's possible that the transport bill has gone up too.
Our political correspondent Harry Farley is following developments.
This is the £15.8 million on average that the Home Office spends on all asylum seeker accommodation. That's been revealed as part of this report that we've got this morning. We should say that's an average for the last few years. The Home Office isn't saying how much they've spent on asylum seeker transport this year. And the reason that might matter is that actually, the government has promised to end the use of asylum seeker hotels altogether. They say they want to house asylum seekers in other sites, such as former military barracks. But actually, the numbers are going up. We had some new figures this week that showed that now more than 36,000 asylum seekers are housed in hotels. That's up from about 32,000 last June. And so you would presume that perhaps that the figure for the amount of money they've spent on transport would also have gone up. The Home Office isn't telling us that. They say the average over the last few years is just shy of £16 million. And the hope from inside the Home Office is that now that figure will come down, because they have said, as Nick was explaining, that only taxis will be allowed for exceptional circumstances, that for routine medical appointments asylum seekers will be expected to get public transport. Just to explain why the taxis sort of have happened in the first place is that asylum seekers are given one return bus pass a week, and that any necessary travel beyond that is arranged by taxi. And that what the Home Office is saying today is that as a result of that BBC investigation a few weeks ago, that's now changed. And for routine medical appointments, they'll be expected to get public transport.
And clearly, asylum and anything to do with it is a big political issue at the moment. What kind of reaction has there been?
Yeah, so a massive political issue and only sort of growing, as it were, particularly with the dominance in the polls of Reform UK and Nigel Farage, I suppose, making that issue their number one priority. For the Conservatives part, the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, says that the issue here is that Labour can't get a grip on the illegal immigration crisis.